Hey guys, welcome to Adventure Camping. Tactical Nut here with probably my first real instructional video. And what I feel most passionate about, what I feel like a lot of people need information on, is how do I buy the right knife? Now, in my opinion, the very first thing you have to realize is that not all knives are created equal. Why do I say that? Is because not all knives are meant to do the same thing. If you have a steak knife in your house, you're not going to use that to try to go cut down a tree. If you have a butter knife, you're not going to go use that to try to carve wood. So that's just probably the most simple, basic example I could give you, but it's just a small sample of the whole idea of not all knives are created equal. And so if you're going to go buy a knife, you're kind of new to the bushcraft industry, survival, camping, backpacking, any of this kind of lifestyle, the first thing you need to decide is, what am I going to use this new knife for? Well, there's a lot of options that you have out there. One of them is going to be a survival knife. Now, the whole point of a survival knife is that it is meant to be kind of the jack of all trades, but the master of none. Meaning, it can do a lot of different things pretty good, but it's not going to do any one thing really awesome. You know, it's not going to excel at one particular task, but it can take care of a lot of things in case this is the only thing you have. Then you have the bushcraft knife. This would be your Mora knife. This would be, the first one was the Michael Hawk knife, the Hellion Survivor. This is the Michael Hawk Peregrine and a Mora Companion. Now, both of these knives are awesome at carving wood, at processing small wood, any kind of around the campsite kind of task, or even if you're just really into carving wood. This is better into carving, this is better into camp tasks, but both can do both. So these are really good camp knives. These are good bushcraft knives. Then you have a, let's just say, hunting knife. This is the Cold Steel Canadian belt knife. This is designed in the 50s to be a really good at skinning and field dressing animals. So if you're a hunter, this is a really good example of a knife that you would want to use if you have to skin animals after you've hunted them. Then you have another topic of self-defense or a tactical use knife. A tactical knife would be a knife that if you were in law enforcement, the military, or if you just felt like, I don't want to carry a firearm and I want to carry a knife to defend my life, this would be the kind of blade that would go into that mode. Then you have what they call the EDC knife, or the everyday carry. The everyday carry knife is meant to cut open boxes, open your mail, kind of use the tip like a screwdriver. Maybe if you have a cut, you can cut off some extra skin. You can pry small things open. This is not a heavy-duty knife by any means. This is meant to use this stuff that you would do around your house all day. You got a piece of string coming off on your clothing. There's a piece of cloth you need to cut off. There's a 1,000 different tasks, but they're all small tasks. And that is what your EDC knife or your typical small pocket knife is meant to be used on. Another category, a backup knife. This is the Michael Hawk Kestrel neck knife. Now this is typically carried in a small sheath that's hung around your neck, but this is the kind of knife that's meant that if your big survival knife broke, or your tactical knife broke, or possibly even your bushcraft knife broke, or you lost them because, I mean, if you're out in the woods, you're in a survival situation, or you're camping, hiking, backpacking, it's easy to lose things. This is a good little thing to have around your neck to just go along with, hey, I've got to back up to whatever my main knife was. Then you get custom knives. Custom knives are highly specialized. They're typically really expensive. This is a Damascus steel knife with buffalo horn handles. They are meant to excel at whatever you want them to excel at, because you're going to call a custom knife designer You're going to get in touch with them. You're going to tell them exactly what you want your knife to do, how you want it to feel, and what you want it shaped like and what you want it made out of. Now, because of that, it's going to do what you want it to do, not what somebody else designed it to do. So that is a huge, huge advantage of a custom knife. But it's its own particular category. Then you have specialty knives, which this is the Cold Steel Bushman. Now, this is kind of meant as a survival knife. I would not personally put it in that category because you have a hollow handle. You can put a stick through it. You could use it as a spear. Yes, it can do some small camp tasks. It can do wood splitting. Does really good with with batoning. You can do feather sticking, that kind of thing. But the design, in my opinion, was not enough comfort. This was too slippery without modifications. A lot of stuff going on with it that I would not put it into, I'm going to put this on my hip and go out into the woods. I could have a ton of fun with it. Yes, I could use it like a spear all day. I could do a whole bunch of other things, and that's pretty awesome. But that's its own kind of special category. This is more of a fun knife. And then you also have kind of a secondary backup. This is your credit card knife. This is mostly plastic. You can see them on the internet from a couple different companies. It folds up like a credit card size, but then it will fold out and can be used very effectively as almost like an EDC knife, just like one of these. But what if you lost it, you forgot it, you broke it, or whatever? So, as far as that goes, you have a lot of categories to think of. So you have to decide in the beginning, what do I want this knife to do? What is it going to be used for? Because if you buy a knife with an expectation that the knife was not designed to have, you're going to be disappointed and you're not going to understand or use your knives correctly and you're not going to get the correct function out of it. So I've got some notes here, so I'm just going to keep referring to these so I keep myself on track. The next step is going to be, how much money do I have to spend on this knife? Now, if you are a huge knife person like I am, people will look at knives and go, the more expensive the better. And a lot of times that's true. But if you watch my channel, I also can show you a ton of different options that are very inexpensive. And so if you're new to the knife field, I will tell you 100 times over, go inexpensive first. Because you don't want to go out, because Spyderco, this was like a little over $40 knife. Spyderco has knives well into the hundreds of dollars. So if I go out and I spend $200, $300, $400 on a knife, what happens if it's not performing like I wanted it to? It's not doing the functions that I wanted to because, well, this is more of a self-defense tactical knife, but I wanted to use it out in the woods carving wood. I wanted to put it in my pocket and just open packages. You know, you've wasted a lot of money or you've broken your knife because you've put it into use for something it wasn't designed to do. So if you're new to the knife community, go to your knife stores. When you go to buy something, start off inexpensive because you know what? First you got to get used to using it, but there's also a lot of great stills out there that aren't really expensive. The next thing you need to do is research your steel. Now, this knife right here has a 5160 steel. This thing is built like a tank. I could stab this in a cliff and hang off of it. I could pry it in between two trees and tear the tree apart, and this thing's never going to break. This thing is an absolute beast. I love that kind of steel. But this is an AUS 8. It's a really good steel. It's a budget steel, but it's not nearly as strong as this one. But these have two different, totally different kind of tasks involved when you're going to buy it. So you have to know that going into it. This is a Scandinavian kind of steel, or out of Sweden. So it's meant to be really rust resistant, but at the same time, it's not going to be nearly as strong. You know, this is a Damascus steel. This has 1095 high carbon steel and a 15 V20N steel. So two ridiculously awesome stills. So none of these, this SK5, I can bend this knife almost in half and it won't break. Now, will it chop? No, not really, not very well. Will it do a feather stick? Yeah, pretty well. I can throw it like a spear. Yeah. So these stills, although this is the fun knife, it's extremely durable, it's not going to do the same thing this one will. So you have to have the expectation going into it, knowing what the still is going to do. And what you have to consider when you're buying a still, what the manufacturers have going into it. They have to look at what is the toughness or the hardness of the still. If I make it really tough, guess what? It's not going to hold an edge very well. If I make it really hard, it's going to hold an awesome edge for a long time. But the two can't be combined. I can't make it extremely tough and hold an edge for a really long time. So you have to think about that. Edge retention, which just kind of played into that. How long is it going to hold an edge? If you don't mind sharpening a knife on a very frequent basis, then a soft still, not a bad pick for you. If you hate sharpening knives, a soft still, a very bad pick, because a soft still has to be resharpened all the time. Corrosion resistance. This is an 8CR13 MOV, which is very similar to your Boss 8, right? Stainless steel is very corrosion resistant. That's why they call it stainless. It doesn't rust very easily. Well, a carbon steel will rust very easily, but it's a lot stronger. So knife manufacturers are constantly trying to find a balance between the two. Do I want it to be really tough, or do I want it to be really rust resistant? Now, if you live in the desert, having a knife that is extremely corrosion resistant is not really necessary, because you're never going to get wet, it's never going to rain, so you don't have to worry about humidity, that kind of thing. So stainless steel is probably not, I won't say a bad option, but it's not a concern. I mean, you can go with the highest carbon steel content and you never have to worry about it rusting because there's no humidity, or there's no moisture in the air. Well, where I live, there's a lot of moisture and there's a lot of humidity. So I have to, even though I love the 5160 still, it's built like a tank, I have to keep my knives oiled because they will rust fairly quickly if I don't take care of them. Even your good stainless like an 8CR13 MOV, highly rust resistant, but where I live, I have to keep an eye on them. I still have to keep them oiled. So you have to know what's going on. Wear resistance is another thing that they have to take into consideration. How long can this knife survive? Like whatever conditions I put it to use in its intended category, how long is it going to last? Strength, flexibility. Do I want any give in this knife? Case in point, I can bend this knife for days. If I had a vise, I could bend this thing to about here and it will not break. But at the same time, it has to sacrifice other qualities in order to attain that. So when you go into looking at a knife, there's a lot of really awesome stills. 8CR13, one of the things that and the Boss 8 I love is that they hold an edge for a decent amount of time. Not a long time, but a decent amount. You can get most tasks done and you don't have to worry about sharpening. And you can go for a decent amount of time without sharpening. But they also, when you go to sharpen it, they sharpen really quickly. Now, some of your stronger stills, they take a lot more work to get it sharp again once they do get dull. They may hold the edge for a long time, but to get them back to that point takes a lot of work, and a lot of people aren't willing to put in that work. And also, those stills are more expensive. Now, the next point is you have to research the blade, what they call the blade grind. So I'm going to show you this right here because there's 6 basic ones. Your number 1, this is what they call the concave or the hollow grind. This is the most common grind you will see on any manufactured and highly produced knife, because this is the easiest one for a machine to put an edge on. The bonus of this is that it takes if you see how thin that tip is, that edge is, it can get extremely sharp. The only problem is that is really easy to roll and bend. So it can take a lot of work maintaining it, but it can get extremely sharp. Now, a lot of high producing knives or knife manufacturers they're going to use this because it's easiest to manufacture. Now number 2, a full flat grind. That is the Spyderco that I have right here. As you can see, it's the exact same all the way up the blade. These do really awesome with slicing. The number 1, the hollow grind, is great at slicing to an extent, because when it gets up to this portion of the blade, it kind of starts to form a wedge. But with this one, awesome at slicing. Hollow grind, terrible at being an impact or a chopper, because it's so easy to bend that edge. Now number 3, which is going to be your saber grind, as you can see, or some people call it a V grind, is an extremely strong edge. You can use it to chop, you can use a lot of stuff. It's easy to even resharpen. So a lot of your bushcraft knives, a lot of people, or your bushcraft people, love this kind of grind. Number 4, a chisel grind. Now if you think of a chisel, like you use a hammer and chisel as a sculptor or as a construction worker and stuff, these are good because it only has one edge to sharpen in the field. Now the Emerson knives, or a lot of fighting knives, are used on this because if you're in the field, I only have one edge to sharpen. Number 5 is going to be your compound grind or double grind, which means they start to sharpen it here and then they put a second edge here. And then number 6, your concave grind. So as you can see, it's rounded out here. Now, your most common cutting implements that you will see with the concave grind are like hatchets and axe, because this is an extremely durable grind. This can take a pounding, a beating for days and days and days and still hold its edge. Now a lot of custom knife makers also use this grind because that edge will take a pounding for days and days and days and days, and you can just use it and abuse it, and it lasts a really long time. It's just harder to resharpen, and it takes a little different experience and technique in order to get it back to where you need it to be. Now these are your most basic. There's always going to be variations of these, but these are your primary ones that you need to think about. What I want, how easy can I resharpen it, and as far as what am I going to use it for, what am I cutting into, how is this going to play out? Now, there's parts of this, and unless I'm going to make this an extremely long video, you're going to have to do your research. Like I said, with the blade steels, you got to do your research. There's 1,000 blade steels, and there's a bunch of different categories. You got to do some on your own. And there's a ton of different websites and blade forums that can give you the information, because it would take way too long to run down all of them. So you're going to have to do a little bit on your own. That's just kind of how life works. Another option you have to think about is the shape of the blade that you're going to use. Now, I'm going to run down some variations, and of course there's always, these are your basics, but there's always going to be 1,000 different variations from here. Now, your number 1, this is what they call a straight back. So obviously you can see, run straight back, just your swoop of your cutting edge. Number 2, your drop point. As you can see, the top of the blade goes straight and then it comes down. But then of course your cutting edge is going to go up to meet it, but instead of just going straight across, it comes down. Your curved trailing point, number 3, this is not the most common of blade shapes, but it is out there. Number 4, your clip point. Straight across here, and then swoops down, and then of course your cutting edge, goes straight and then curves up to meet it. Number 5, your straight clip point. Straight back, and it's only a gradual decline here, and then the cutting edge coming up to meet it. Number 6, sheep's foot. This goes straight up and then drops down. It's almost like an upside down straight back. And all of these have their own functions, I promise you. Number 7, your Tanto style. Perfect example. I really like these. They have an extremely strong tip. These are better for fighting knives or self-defense, but they do have their place. Swords have the same thing. And then 8, your spear point, which means you're coming straight across this way, and then both come in to a point. Like if you would think of a spear, somebody's going to be throwing out and to defend themselves. Now, once again, this is where you're going to have to do some of your own research. There's a whole bunch of different variations of these, and there's even different styles, that is different from what these basic ones are. But you're going to have to do a little bit of time and research and find out what knife do I want to use, or like what the purpose is, and then for that purpose, what is some of the better blade designs in order to accomplish that goal. Because I can have a Tanto point all day, and then I go out in the woods and I'm trying to carve or do detailed carving, like as in a walking stick or something like that. Well, that's never going to do it. It's not designed for it. It's designed to be more of a fighting knife. But if I wanted to do a lot of really fine carving, I could pull out a Mora, and I could do a lot of really good detailed design carving with it. Or at least better than the Tanto point. So, once again, you need to decide what is the knife used for, what is the best steel for that, and then two, what is the best shape to accomplish that task. Now, another thing, knives are just like guns. People are very passionate about what they do. They're very passionate about their knives, and a lot of different people will stick to one particular blade design or brand, and nothing you can say can change the way they think, feel, or if they're ever going to carry it again or not. But what you have to decide on your own is what's going to work best for me, my task, and what I intend for it to do. Now, along with that, you also have to say, how long do I want this knife blade to be? Because in a survival blade, the Michael Hawk knife, this is a 9-inch blade. A lot of people will have a very hard time using a blade of this length. It'll wear their hands out and they can't control it very well, especially if you're not used to using it. This, even for some people, is a survival blade. Way easier to control, it's much lighter, and they can do more with it. But if I got a pocket knife, how long do I want my pocket knife to be? That's your decision. Don't ever let anybody else tell you how long your knife needs to be, because you need to decide what those tasks you're going to put it to use are. It's one of those where like going, okay, like I literally have no hesitation carrying a 4 1/4 inch blade every day. Why? Because I'm going to use it for a whole bunch of different things. Where some people are like, I only want a 3-inch blade. Either one of these. Or some people are only like a 2.5-inch blade or 2-inch blade. That is all up to you, your preference. And so you have to decide on your own what you want this knife to do and what the length of that blade is going to be. Mora knives are really popular for bushcraft, and they're just barely over 4 inches long. You can get a lot of control out of that, a lot of detail work, but this is longer, I can still get a lot of work out of it. I can still do a lot of detail work with this, but I'm used to using knives. So it's up to you. You got to experiment. You got to decide for yourself what you think you need. Now, a thing when it comes to the blades is, do you want a fine edge or a serrated edge? Now, if you notice, none of the knives I've showed you have a serrated edge, which means like your steak knife style function on here. I don't use them because if your knife is sharp, it's going to cut whatever you need. If I have rope, a seat belt, cloth, a sharp knife is going to cut them all. So I don't need a serrated edge. But some people really like that. So you have to decide for yourself, do I want that capability or do I not? Because just remember, if you have a serrated edge, it's a whole different sharpening system as opposed to just a fine edge. So one more thing to think about. The knife community around the world is starting to get away from serrated edges, if that helps you in influence your decision. But once again, that's something you have to decide for yourself. Another thing, and this pretty much just pertains to survival knives, and that's do I want a sawback knife? Now, if you're batoning with a sawback knife, it's going to rip your baton to shreds. But these are also very good for sawing through smaller diameter wood or notching wood. So if I have to carve into a tree or a branch or something like that because I want to hang stuff off of it or I want to hook stuff to it, these come in really handy for it. And if you don't have a saw, yes. Now, personally, this is probably the only one I'm going to have that's going to have a saw back. I don't use it personally, but other people may. So if you need to try one first and then see if you actually use it, and then if you don't, get another one, you can always sell the one that you have. It's no big deal. Then the last point, and to me, I think this helps people a ton. Before you go out and buy a knife, if you have friends that are really familiar with knives, ask them, what brands do you like? What style do you like? What are you using it for? Always good to ask the experts, so to say. I am not a knife expert by any means. I am a huge user of knives. I'm not a collector. I'm never one of those that's going to buy a knife that's going to put it on the shelf and never touch it. If I buy a knife, it's going to be because I'm going to use it. Even if it was a $300 or $400 knife, I'm going to buy it because I'm going to use it. I'm not going to be one of those that just sits on the shelf. But I still go to friends all the time that I know that are big knife guys, and I'm like, okay, what are you using now? What have you been using? What have you used in the past? So I can find new knives that I want to try and maybe start to really like. Until recently, I've never used a full flat grind knife. I've now really started to love it because I found out the capabilities that it has exceeded my expectations. A Scandi grind, this is kind of a slightly different than the Sabre grind. This thing is ridiculously awesome. I wish most of my knives had this. I wouldn't have known it had I not heard about it, talked to people, and used it. The next thing to know is go into a store and ask people to hold the knife. Because, as you see, every different knife on this table almost has different handles. This has a micarta handle. The wetter it gets, almost the stickier it gets. This thing is like ridiculously awesome, but they're also very expensive handle scales. This is almost like a rubberized grip. Your handles stick to it pretty much no matter what. Polypropylene handle, like a different kind of polymer or plastic, but it's still really good, but it is fairly slick. G10, which is extremely popular right now. It's like a really, really ultra hard plastic, but can be very grippy depending on the texture of it. And so you have to decide for yourself, do I like the feel of this? Because if you don't like holding it, you're not going to use it. It's just like a firearm. If you wanted to be a concealed carry holder of a firearm and you're like, I want to carry a firearm every day, but it's too heavy, guess what? You're never going to carry it. If it doesn't fit under your clothing like you want it to, you're not going to carry it. So just like knives, if you don't like the way the handle feels, you're never going to use it. So go into different outdoor stores or even gun shops or whatever in your area allows it, Bass Pro Shop, Academy Sports, whoever has them behind the counter, ask to hold them. Feel it in your hand because guess what? If you don't like it, you're not going to use it. And then if you can, and I highly recommend this because this just as a case and example, borrow one from your friends. This is a buddy of mine. He is a huge knife guy. He's got his son really into knives and we started talking about it, so he's going to start letting me borrow some knives to review for the channel. And this is his son's knife. And guess what? This thing is outstanding. It has different blade shape, blade design. Everything about it is kind of a little bit different than I'm used to. Handle scales of the G10. But it's a new way to experience and decide, is this knife for me? Because if a buddy of yours has it and he's willing to let you borrow it for a short period of time or a couple weeks, a month, and you carry it for a little while and you're like, okay, I never used it, I didn't like it, I didn't like the way it felt, or it wasn't cutting the way I wanted to, not to go buy this knife. So, yes, there's a lot of guys here on YouTube, just like myself, that review these knives. I think we give great insight into what these knives can do. But you, on your own, have to decide for yourself, what do I want this knife to be? What do I expect out of it? And then, am I going to like it? So sometimes you just have to pick them up and feel the different ones. Now, after you get used to that, if you know what G10 feels like, you can buy anything on the internet that has a G10 handle scale because you already know what G10 feels like. You know what micarta feels like after you've used it. But until you get that experience, you're not going to know, and you got to get your hands on it to know, am I going to like this or not? So, to kind of sum all this up, knives are very, very personal. They're very specific as to what they're used for and to what they're going to do. And you have to realize that going into it. If you expect this to chop down a tree, you're going to be truly disappointed. It will excel at carving up wood and doing all of your camp tasks, food prep, a lot of options, but will never chop down a tree. So don't expect it to. You have to know what these things are capable of and what they're designed for, and use them in that manner. So when people ask me, why do you need so many knives? It's because there's so many different things that they can do. There's so many different environments that I can go into, and I need one that's going to match that and perform like I need it to in that environment and in that task. So hopefully this video has helped you, coached you in some small way in your purchasing decisions in the future. I will always highly recommend custom knives, although they are extremely expensive most of the time. I got a ridiculously awesome deal on this one. But if you could sit down with somebody that's very accomplished at knives and tell them exactly what you want out of it, what kind of steels you want, what you're expecting, they can design it exactly to what you want. And of course, you're never going to be unhappy with that. But if you're just getting into knives, don't even think about it. Start with the old cheapos first. And there's a lot of awesome options in between the $30 and $40 range that will last you a really long time and really excel at their performance. So, once again, I hope this helps. And in the future, in the meantime, be prepared and have fun.